Hi, my name is Dr. Felucia, and I'm a licensed psychologist. In today's video, which is actually part of a series called Why Is This So Hard? I'm going to be talking about why grief and grieving is so hard after spiritual abuse. And if you go and click on the title of this playlist, you'll understand why, or you'll understand what this Why Is This So Hard series important and what it talks about. Okay, but basically, in sum, the series examines why certain things that may seem like basic concepts are so challenging after spiritual abuse. And the first one in this series, I talked about self-care and why that can be a challenge. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about grief and why grief can be so hard after spiritual abuse. And the first thing is that, in spiritually abusive environments, toxic positivity thrives. And I do have a video on toxic positivity. And so if you just kind of search the playlist, you'll be able to find it, but there'll be one on toxic positivity. And basically what toxic positivity is it's not being positive, right? Because some people, you got to have nuance when you're on this channel and understand what it is. It's not saying don't be positive. It's favoring positive feelings over challenging feelings, right? And so things kind of like just focus, like basically just focusing on the positive at the expense of being real, right? Because we're not positive all the time. We have challenging emotions, and I would argue that those even make the positive feelings, even more vibrant, right? It helps us understand that our lives are full of different emotions. Okay, so if you want a good idea of toxic positivity, actually, if you watch the movie Inside Out, one of the characters there shows that. So if you watched it, let me know in the comments and put in there which character you think is this toxic positivity embodiment. Okay, so in environments where toxic positivity thrives, and one of them is a spiritually abusive environment, you're taught it has to be positive all the time. So if you bring up grieving somebody, oh well, I lost this person, someone might come and say, oh, you didn't lose them, they're in heaven, so you didn't lose them. And well, that might be true, but it's a loss for you on earth. Or, oh, they're just in a better place now, and at least they're not suffering. And I understand these can be well-meaning sentiments that people who aren't sure what to say will tell you, but if this is all you hear in the process of trying to grieve, it makes it very challenging. Okay, and so eventually what you kind of do is and actually not even something you do, but the process of grieving is short-circuited, right? And we have to understand that grief is not a discrete thing. When I say discrete, meaning it has a beginning and an end. That's not what grief is like. Sometimes people feel great, sometimes people feel don't. It is a process that has its ups and downs. It's not linear, and it's not here's the beginning and here's the end. So, and in spiritually abusive environments, that they don't really like that very much because you're bringing up negative emotions. I don't even want to say negative. They're challenging emotions: sadness, grief, anger. And I've said this before, but it's my belief that a lot of people who spew this toxic positivity or really focus in on that are very uncomfortable with who they are inside, especially their own challenging emotions. So you might hear somebody say, well, I never get angry, right? And I don't believe that, but when someone says things like that, they're going to be very uncomfortable if they see someone being angry, right? And so and what that I talked about this too in the first video, that many times people who have been through spiritual abuse feel like their heads and their bodies are separate. It's kind of like this floating feeling sometimes. And that is often because you may have been just taught to deny your humanity all the time. And when this toxic positivity is coming up, you are shamed for being sad about losing someone, and all these sentiments probably don't even make it any better, especially when that's hammered over and over and over again. Okay. Something else that I have found that grieving can be really challenging is that grieving can be challenging after spiritual abuse is that in these environments, if you've experienced grief in a spiritually abusive environment, you might oftentimes be dismissed altogether. I talk about this in my video about how to spot a spiritually abusive person, but spiritually abusive people in general tend to be very dismissive because they have discomfort sitting with their own challenging emotions. Then they don't want to hear yours either and be in the presence of that. And so because of that, you're going to feel dismissed. You're going to be told that, well, this grief is not a big deal. People die, life is fragile. There's so much more to be seen on earth and experience, so don't let this rob you of that. And again, spiritually abusive sentiments often have a tad of truth to them, right? A grain of truth. So yeah, you don't want to be overcome and consumed by grief to the point where, you know, you have an expanded time of just not functioning and not recovering. Nobody wants that. And that rarely, I shouldn't say that rarely happens. It does happen, but there's also help for that too. So it doesn't happen just because you're grieving. That's what I meant to say. So just because you're grieving doesn't mean you're going to be consumed by it. Just because you cry doesn't mean you're going to be crying every day continuously for the next 5 years. Emotions don't work that way. So you might have been dismissed, and so you might be more likely to dismiss your own grief after spiritual abuse. Also, admitting that you're grieving can be challenging because in spiritually abusive environments, grief is attached to humanity, right? And I talk about how spiritual abusers shame people for being human. And so instead of understanding grief as, you know what, it's a normal process, we all go through it, your grief indicates a failure in moral character, right? And so I've heard people describe grief as just a lack of faith. They describe grief as self-centeredness. And I've heard that before, that people who grieve are selfish because all they care about is themselves missing that person, which, gosh, you know, I don't know what to say except just that really bothers me when I hear that. So, and it's not true, but the point is grief is associated with that, that bad part of humanity or whatever it is, right? Lack of character, lack of faith, selfishness, being low vibrational, whatever it is, that is what is attached to grieving. And so it may be hard for you even to admit to yourself that, wow, like I am grieving right now. I have grief. Because then you think I'm grieving, then it means, well, what does this mean? Does it mean that I'm this type of person? Maybe I just need to be stronger, et cetera, okay? And then, you know, when you think about that, those things can make it really hard to grieve. You know, if you're in an environment where people are not very emotionally healthy, they want positivity at all costs, you know, they're doing a lot of spiritual bypassing, which is basically taking spiritual concepts and just throwing a blanket over what challenging thing you're dealing with, then when you have left that environment and you're in the process of leaving, it's very difficult to feel okay to grieve. And so if you're in that position, I really feel for you. I know it's difficult. You know, try and get, I wouldn't say try, like attempt, words today. Basically, look for professional help if you feel like this is a problem, because a professional can help you. And I think we all know how to grieve. It's just giving ourselves permission. Everybody will grieve in different ways. But when you don't give yourself that permission to because of spiritual abuse, then you can feel really torn up inside and even just more disconnected from yourself. And so a licensed professional, qualified professional can help you with things like that. And also it's just important to remember to be patient and kind to yourself as you grieve. So I hope that information helps you. If you haven't already, please like the video, share it, subscribe, and comment. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section. Remember, I asked a question at the beginning, and I'll ask it again if you missed it, but what character did you, if you watched the movie Inside Out before, what character do you feel embodies toxic positivity? And then also too, do you have any tips for anybody who's going through a similar challenge? How did you deal with this when you were grieving in a spiritually abusive environment or in the process of leaving it or have left it, right? And then also, what challenges are you having? You know, I really love our community because we're helpful, we're supportive, we give each other advice. So any things that you think, well, I love, you know, someone's perspective on this, put it in the comments, all right? So I hope you have a wonderful day that is filled with peace. And one more thing, the link in my description box may or may not be working at this point to schedule a consultation. So the best thing to do right now is just to email me and I'll put my email in the description box, all right? Have a peaceful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.